Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water? That is one of my favorite Christmas songs. I'm not going to torture you with the whole song. Look it up if you don't know it, but it's one of my favorite songs. Uh, and that's how I'm going to start off our Christmas podcast series. It's going to be a series called Mary, Did You Know? And it's going to focus a bit on Mary. Quick weather report. Cloudy, rainy here today. Um, the Christmas story starts on an actually a very surprising note, something that was quite scary for somebody. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant with the Holy Spirit. Let me stop there for a second. The process of the steps that are taken to get married were different in their culture than our culture. So the story doesn't easily line up exactly with our customs and our traditions. So in our like in some cultures, mom and dad pick a spouse for their children and they just announce it, right? And then there's a big ceremony and on they go. Clem 2 used to be like that in the old days, arranged marriages. Some of our older folks, when we first moved there, were from arranged marriages. It's always interesting to me how those marriages, the people tended to learn to love each other in a very deep way. But that's an aside. In our culture today, you go through a dating process, uh, sometimes quickly, sometimes takes quite long. You fall in love. I'm going to say it in a very traditional way. Things are changing. Things have changed. The boy asks the girl to marry him. Maybe he even goes to the father and asks permission, and they get engaged. So dating, engagement, then after a period of whatever, months, whatever, marriage. So dating, engagement, marriage. That's the three steps. Um, Unfortunately, for many people today, we don't give as much credence to God's guidance in these matters. So people are doing dating, living together, eventually marrying, and on. In their culture of the day, they kind of had a an engagement process, but it was different than our engagement process. In their culture, once you got engaged, we'll put it that way, or in our story, she was pledged to be married. That was more than our engagement, but less than our marriage. But legally, they were bound together, but they were not married yet. They would not sleep together and have sex or any of those things. Um, he was expected to go off and build a home and prepare a place for them to live. That language that we find in John chapter 14, I go away to prepare a place for you, is the language of marriage. And then maybe a year later, there would be a ceremony, they would be married, and off they would go into married life. So, more than our engagement, less than our marriage. Their marriage and our marriage are the same, but it's the in-between stages. This is where Mary and Joseph find themselves. And in it, it starts with the way I titled this. Some people may take exception, is the Christmas story starts with a single pregnant woman. Not single as in the only one, but as in not married. And that in the day, this is another thing that's very different than our culture. It, that in the day would have been shocking and shameful. There was a time in our culture when it was shocking and shameful. Today, we don't even think anything about it anymore. Somebody gets pregnant, they're not married, sometimes they're not even with the guy anymore, and we all celebrate, and we should celebrate every new life. It's not the child's fault that things happen the way they happen. Um, but we don't have any shame associated with it anymore. And I'm not sure that's a good thing for society in general. God's plan is for people to get committed to one another, married, and then go off and have life together. And most of the time, but not always, it will involve children. In Mary's day, this was an extremely, as I said, this was an extremely shameful thing. And Joseph knew that. Joseph understood how serious this situation was. He loved Mary, but from his perspective, Mary had been unfaithful to him, and they hadn't even made it to the marriage yet. And from his perspective, she had already cheated on him. So I don't even know what that would have been like, where Mary had to explain to Joseph, Joseph, I'm pregnant right now. I don't even know. But all I know is it says it doesn't give us the conversation that happens between Mary and Joseph. What we learn is because Joseph, her husband, notice how he's called her husband, even though they haven't been married yet. That's what I mean by that's that in between, more than our engagement, less than a full marriage. But because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law, so he was a good person. You might call him religious, you might call him spiritual. He was a man of faith committed to following the law, the Lord, in the way the Lord had laid out life to be lived. And from his perspective, Mary had done a terrible thing. Yet he did not want to expose her to public disgrace. That's because he loved her. He's probably so confused right now and so utterly hurt. And yet he still did not want to hurt her back. But the only sensible thing to do from Joseph's perspective in the culture of the day was to divorce his beloved Mary. And he was going to do it quietly so that he didn't add to her shame. He knew she would have shame. She would have personal shame. Her family would feel shame. The people that knew of the events. But the story, he didn't have to make it worse. And so he was going to do it quietly. And it says all this took place to fulfill what the Lord said through the prophet, the virgin. In the Old Testament, that word virgin can also be single woman, but in the Greek, where this is written, it only has one option, the virgin. And so we know that the prophecy back from the Old Testament was pointing to a virgin. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. This woman who did nothing wrong, who God caused to be pregnant, will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which will mean God with us. It's an astounding, shocking start to the Christmas story. A single woman finding herself pregnant, doesn't even know how and why at first. We're going to come to how she learns about it, but doesn't even know how or why. It had to be the strangest thing to her. She hasn't even had sex with Joseph or any other man. And yet she realizes, I'm pregnant with a baby. How can this be? And for this lesson, the opening lesson, I just want to leave it there. That those feelings that she would have had as we get to know Mary. I know the song is about Mary. Did you know about Jesus? It's a great song. Listen to it. We're going to be asking the question, do we know Mary? And maybe that should be the title of my series. Not Mary, did you know, but do we know Mary? But in this opening lesson, it's enough for us to see the predicament and feel the emotions of what she was going through in that moment. And yet God had something great. In fact, the greatest thing, the greatest news in all the world was about to happen. And that's that God would come in the form of this baby boy and live with us. And we'll explore what that means in a future lesson too. But between now and then, um, hope that blesses your heart as we start the Christmas season series. Mary, did you know? And Lord willing, I look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday.